Going.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
Salam, hello, peace to you all, and welcome to another edition of Iran versus the Epstein Empire. This is episode 8, Unsanction My Heart. And we have a lot of news to catch up on in this continuing series. And it's great to have you all here. Before I introduce our esteemed panel, I just want to remind everyone that they could like the stream. That's something you could do right now. Very simple to do. Boost it, and that way other people will find out about it as it gets on their streams and on their feeds. And also, of course, you could share it. We're streaming on X, on at least 2 different accounts on X, and you can just retweet that. And we are, of course, also on a number of YouTube channels, and you can always share those on your social media as well. I also want to say, even though we concluded the Samir Project Ramadan campaign, because we're no longer in Ramadan, and this is Eid al-Fitr, the festival at the end of the month of fast, and we're celebrating that. Nonetheless, I do want to remind you that you can still make a donation in general to the Samir Project, the wonderful Palestinian Mutual Aid Society working in Gaza to provide collective, support for Palestinians, to allow them to continue to remain and live on their land and to resist settler colonial dispossession, occupation, and genocide. But in fact, actually, I think the Ramadan campaign itself is still open, and they were just a little short of their final goal, which was 550,000 pounds, and they are at, I believe, 521,000. So we could help make a little bit of a dent and boost them towards actually completing that goal in the next few days. So please do join me in making a donation. Please be generous. I know so many of you have given already over the 6 weeks or 7 weeks that we've been doing this campaign. If you can, even if it hurts a little bit, as Benji, quoting Justin, always says, give till it hurts. Please do so. Okay, so I will put that link back into the comments again, and it's great to see so many people in the comments. But people are also very excited already in the chat because we have unveiled our special mystery guest for tonight, which is Jared J from Millennials Are Killing Capitalism, and we are streaming on Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. So that's very cool. If you're watching there, also boost it on the algorithm and like it and so forth. Jay, it's great to have you come on. I know it was kind of last minute and not always that convenient, but you're a trooper and you're showing your solidarity by joining the live stream. It's wonderful to have you here.
Well, thanks for inviting me, all of you. And Indy, it's great to share space with you. I've shared with these other comrades before, but I really appreciate the work that you do as well. And so it's good to be with you. But yeah, I mean, I've been battling. I think I've decided that it's allergies, because the thing that seems to work against it best is like really strong allergy medicine. So I'm here. I've been battling that for a couple of days, but really honored to be with you all, and kind of am always ready to stream when the world is like this right now,
Yeah.
because it's just good to be with people and see folks in the chat and talk about the things that are going on in the world, because they are like like the whole world is going to be potentially determined by this war one way or another, in very significant ways. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be, but there's all kinds of potential. They are good and bad, and so I think that when the world is like that and you live in the middle of empire, that a lot of people don't really have a sense of that, and they're just sort of like, oh, gas is getting really expensive. Um, and gosh, Trump did something stupid here, this kind of discussion, but not necessarily a sense of, you know, declining empire, multipolarity, all of these dynamics that obviously are very much in play right now. So, anyways, it's always great to be with folks to be able to talk about these things.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we've been doing them pretty frequently and regularly. It's felt like, emergency live streams, but both to inform people, but also even just for us to process what's been going on. It's a time for community and solidarity. And we're glad that this has been a space, where people can come and have it be a haven for anti-imperialist sense of community. But to bring in, our regulars, co-hosts of Resistance is Fertile, a collaboration that we've been doing for this whole series. We have both Indy, welcome. And you have a new YouTube channel. So let's make sure people know about that.
Oh God, it's like an old, like it's a vestigial YouTube channel, which it exists. Benji and I are gonna try and streaming on it until they cut it off, because because his old roommate has put out a hit on him. So anytime he appears on YouTube, he gets removed.
Oh, by the way, I just learned today what Kia, the first name of my old roommate, Kia Starmer, means in Farsi. And apparently it means something that I'm going to try and say the most politely possible, but bellend, this thing at the end of the male appendage. So that's who has put a contract out on me.
This is clearly an uncircumcised stream here, I guess we could say. We're keeping it family tonight, but that's Benji, also co-host of Resistance is Fertile here. And maybe Benji, bring your microphone a little closer. Somebody said that it sounded a little hollow. So
yeah, let me try and see what I can do with that. Can you somehow change it? Is this any better?
I think a little bit. Yeah, I think a little bit.
I wonder, check to make sure it's on the right mic on your thing, because it might be your computer mic that's picking up from directly.
Yeah, it's always
normally it's my it's my actual,
yeah,
supposed to be okay, Mike. Let me I'll just use that.
Yeah, so So Eid Mubarak, everyone. First off, they sighted the crescent moon yesterday. My friend was telling me that if they don't sight the moon, they can keep extending Ramadan. And I was like,
well, it can't go past 30 days, really.
Okay.
But if you don't sight it, but there were differences. Most of a large part of the world ended up celebrating Eid on Friday, and in Iran, because they started a day later than others. They ended up celebrating the 30th day. A lunar month can be 29 or 30 days. And so that's why sighting is very important, but that introduces some discrepancies depending on where it's sighted and what kind of method they use for determining. And so that meant that Eid, the end of Ramadan, fell on Saturday. So that was nice because they got Nowruz, on Friday, New Year in the Persian tradition. It's celebrated in other communities as well, but it's very closely connected to and identified with Persian calendar and the start of the new year. And then the very first day of the new year was Eid and the end of Ramadan. So anyway,
and Iran is calling this the Ramadan War. They're trying to, I think, take naming control of this. I saw a joke that if you called everything that America was involved in the America War, it would be endless. You would have hundreds of them. But I think it's because Trump tried to name the last one. I think do you think 12-Day War? That is a good name. But the Ramadan War is going on, and I think it's into day 21 now.
Yeah, today is day 21 of the Ramadan War. What happens to the Ramadan War when we're past Ramadan? One thing that I think is interesting is I saw, and this is just part, I don't know if this is just part of IRGC war trolling that they've been, refining their techniques and becoming, quite noted in this category. But they said, well, they announced that, of course, we were constrained during Ramadan because it's a holy month, and you're actually not supposed to fight unless you're, attacked, and so we were constrained in respect with, how much we could really, rightfully do, because it was Ramadan. But now that it's not Ramadan, we will be unconstrained and expect even greater, kind of severity and frequency of our attacks as we remove restraints. So I think maybe that's what we could say in the post-Ramadan war, as David.
Yeah, you could say that, I guess God put some constraints on you during Ramadan, but then the Great Satan also put some constraints through its missile defense shield, which we, as we know, extended to the Gulf. So that's gone now. And now I think the constraints are off in both ways.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and I think we've been seeing some of the consequences of that. I think, maybe we should talk a little bit about that, as well as what Jay referred to, which was the way in which, how much does this break through given the kind of news cycle. And that's also something that is really quite astonishing to me, is that you have cataclysmic, world potentially altering warfare taking place, and outside of a few corners, it seems, of the internet, and the kind of churn of mainstream news that frames it in a particular anesthetizing sort of way. People are going about things as if it's normal life, except that, of course, everything is so much more expensive, and gas has become, insane, and there's a creeping sense that groceries are also more expensive, and it's affecting people. But whether that breaks into people's consciousness about the seriousness of what we're going through and with what effect, that's kind of interesting question. Like, what we're seeing on that front. Yeah. So,
But I think people maybe view it from like a Western perspective, but it's already hit here. So we have fuel rationing in Sri Lanka. We have basically fuel shortages. I think in Philippines, Thailand, you can draw a map of where the stuff is coming out of the Strait of Hormuz, and it comes out here, and then it comes out Southeast Asia, India, and it's already hit here. And then people are already realigning. So everybody's on you just watch Narendra Modi's sort of Twitter feed. He's furiously sending greetings for every holiday you can think of. It's like Happy Mother's Day, like Happy Nowruz. So it's like it's like someone who's showing up in your WhatsApp, just sending you greetings because they're trying to get money. Like that, he's trying to get supplies now. It's shifting. So you can see that the power, like Iran has already taken power over the Strait of Hormuz. Like the petrodollar for a lot of us is kind of dead because they're pricing it in won. We're like, okay, we'll price it in tea, we'll price it in won, we'll price it in whatever you want. So it's a timing difference. Markets in the West are supposed to sort of price this in. It's supposed to be a bet on the future, but they're just insane. They're like football bettors now. I think they're really not thinking.
That's an interesting issue about the discrepancies in oil pricing. What's going on there? How is the market completely gullible, it seems, to statements made by the US government or defense secretary, that these bizarre, ridiculous, fantastical assurances that are made, oh, it's going to be over really soon, we've just destroyed everything, and that it seems to be done with an eye not to convincing anyone other than oil future commodity speculators, and to suppress prices in the market, even if it's just for a few days. Of course, one wonders also if these are also timed with investments that are being made by people who know when these statements are going to be publicized and so forth. There's a whole kind of corrupt sort of Wurlitzer of information and disinformation that is being, is an adjunct to both the psychological war, but also the personal enrichment of people. That we should talk a little bit about the oil. Jay, did you want to discuss that?
Yeah, well, I just saw Trump just put out a threat on Truth Social, basically, that said if the Strait of Hormuz is not opened within 48 hours, that the United States will bomb every power plant in Iran, starting with the biggest one. And so just kind of, going out there. I mean, it is, I think, just wild to where we have gotten to where like just threatening war crimes is just like, just the daily, thing. Like he did, like it's not only that there's no, everybody knows that there's no enforcement mechanism for international law, on empire, and it's only really pointed at global South states, right? But it's also just to a point where there's not even any pretense around it at all. Like there's not even any interest in pretending anymore like you care about these things. But also, as people were saying, that doesn't sound like someone who's feeling very good about how things are going if they're putting a 48-hour, time clock on Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz, or else they're going to just start, unleashing war crimes.
bombing
Yeah. And I do think also like them shooting down the F-35 the other day, and like all of the F-15s that have been shot, that like another Israeli F-15 was shot down today, like that, they keep talking about, oh, we have total freedom of movement of the skies and all this stuff. But when you look, like the CENTCOM put out some numbers the other day, and like they're actually bombing Iran less and less. Like their success in that is actually, I mean, and they could argue, oh well, we've hit all the targets or whatever, but like, you haven't won and you're bombing less, but your rhetoric is that you're actually bombing more, right? And so there's a lot of disconnect. And then they sent that old boat, like that really old boat with like 2,000 Marines that'll take a month to get to Iran, right? And if it makes it, Mikey, our friend, pointed out that the last time they sent it out, that it had to return within like 10 days because of mechanical failures on the ship. And so it's very interesting because obviously the US has such an expensive military, but it's also been a very long time since it has had to use a lot of it in this kind of way, and so you have a very old, expensive, long maintenance log filled, these are declining assets, right, from old wars. And I don't know, I mean, it's just an interesting, I really struggle to see any kind of strategy that I mean, the main thing that they were talking about yesterday was trying to occupy Karg Island, right? But it's like, what are you're going to send a bunch of Marines to be like, what is that, fish in a barrel, right? To like just be like easy targets, it doesn't make any sense. And as they're saying that, Iran's launching missiles towards Diego Garcia, right, which they didn't even know it had the capacity to shoot them that far, so it's very much not going well for US empire, which obviously is good. But it's just kind of interesting to watch them scramble from day to day.
And then can you see the little graphic I've put down there? Could you share that? So let me just start tonight by saying Tianxia da Luan, Xinxi da Hao, in the immortal words of Chairman Mao, it's chaos everywhere under heaven, the situation is excellent. So that is really how things are starting. And you can see here on this little graphic that I pulled from my Twitter feed, all the oil facilities, oil gas facilities that have actually been targeted in and around the Gulf. So I think it's around 39 at this point. So it's a very serious hit on the global oil production facilities. There's also lots of problems with shipping. I was listening to this channel a few minutes ago. It's called something about shipping. It's a really good channel on shipping. And basically, the guy who was a professional in shipping was describing from the beginning of the Ramadan war how the empire has done absolutely everything it could, whether by omission, commission, by stupidity, or by cunning design, to make the situation worse. From getting insurance for the ships and then not moving them and starting to bomb, and then they couldn't move anymore, to, of course, torpedoing that disarmed ship carrying Iranian ship carrying mostly musicians south of Sri Lanka, which extended, of course, the theater of war incredibly. So it has completely messed up with shipping in general. And I think we are at the outset of a very serious economic shock to the world system. That, in fact, is the overall strategy of our Iranian brothers and sisters, because they, as every anti-colonial liberation war, they are conducting a war of attrition, right? It's about staying on the land longer than you are, than the settlers and the squatters. And the question, and somebody raised it in the chat, is, okay, well, if it's Iran's strategy to go for the economic jugular so that, the US, the empire is forced to stop, but at the same time, it's the empire's strategy to also go for the world's economic jugular, which is what Richard Mehrdurst was saying yesterday. And a few people are saying, oil prices are going up. It's good for the imperialists. It's good for the capitalists. And I don't know if it's good for them systemically, but when we look at this ruling class, and by the way, today I was very inspired to see our friend Radhika Desai also call them the Epstein class, right? And they say, I think the Epstein class is a very good term, because capitalist class implies that, planning implies building, implies being productive, implies, looking a little bit long term, whereas these people are they're just takers. They're just, they're not givers, they're not producers, they're just takers, they're just hedging positions, they're just speculators. And as they do that, of course, societies break down and they become ever more depraved. And so the ruling class we have are really people who basically put out a tweet so they can short or long the market over the next hour before they put the next tweet up. So in that regard, the chaos of this US administration can be understood as just these guys trying to make money. I mean, did you see the latest shakedown attempt by Trump, telling the Gulf countries, is probably calling them in Monaco, Paris, or wherever they've moved to, and say, okay, $2.5 trillion if you want me to stop, and $5 trillion if you want me to continue. But these are all plans of people who really don't have a long-term plan any further than Trump's famed 3-minute attention span max, and that only when the conversation is about himself. And so the name of today's episode is Unsanction My Heart, because of course we've had this absolutely crazy thing happening that, 47 years of engagement, reform, conversations, negotiations, deals, and accepting on the part of white empire conditions that are absolutely violations of a country's sovereignty, in 3 weeks of pummeling every single military asset of white empire in the Gulf, and also some price military and intelligence assets in the Zionist colony. Iran has finally gotten relief, sanction relief. And this has led to some really funny stuff, because I think it's Besant is trying to explain it by saying, yeah, we're only giving them relief so we can use it against them, because they're trying everything they do to keep the price of oil around 120 or something. And they're already, TikTok is full of videos of Americans throwing the pump thing or hose on the floor of the gas station and filming themselves that they're not going to pay $8 or $9 a gallon, which, by the way, Europeans have been paying for like 25 years or something, but they don't run around with gas guzzlers, I guess. But the price is completely, so it's just manipulation of the oil price. And the Iranians have been absolutely brilliant, because they've said, no, sorry, we're closed. There is no petrol to sell to anybody that we haven't sold already. All this oil on the sea is actually already sold. And the other thing they've done that's absolutely brilliant, we talked about it last time, is they are actually de-dollarizing effectively by letting people through the strait, which is not closed, but now you have to go through these two very narrow islands on the Iranian side. You have to pay Iran money, and you have to prove that you are paying your petrol in yuan. So we're basically, not only are they pummeling the Gulf countries and all the imperial assets there, but they're actually pummeling the petrodollar, right? Which has been the way through which empire has controlled international finance. So something momentous is afoot, and it's not going in white empire's direction. So, we are still on course to a strategic victory. And I think what we're seeing in terms of the sanctions is very, very significant, because even when the empire tries to unsanction the Iranian oil, they miss. It doesn't do what they want it to do, and it gives an incredible agitprop victory to the Iranians. And this, chance to say, well, thank you very much, but we're not selling you any petrol at any price.
I'd just like to add some stuff from the comments. So people are saying that, so the attack on Diego Garcia, Iran hasn't claimed it yet, which I think they're correct to say that. I haven't seen Iran claim it. I mean, God knows they deserve it. And honestly, England is directly, so that's a England colony. The United Kingdom is directly involved, but through its air base is really in the UK. A lot of the B whatever bombers are coming out of there, and then they're transiting around European airspace, because Europe, even though they're of course supporting the war in many ways, is for some reason not allowing the airspace. So the UK is directly involved. I think they've come out and said this already. But yeah, in general, Iran hasn't claimed the Diego Garcia hit, which I think is correct.
Someone said Japan was paying in yen. They are not paying in yen. They are paying in yuan, which is the RMB, the Chinese currency, as far as my information tells me.
Yeah, and like with the oil stuff, like I think Galibaf, who's the Iranian parliament speaker, he said he put up a sign saying sold out. It's not like Iran just had a bunch of oil floating around waiting for America to unsanction them.
But it is interesting that this was apparently not accepted into the negotiations. We know that, of course, the negotiations were clearly fake, but there it was something that the U.S. wasn't agreeing, which is a big demand of Iran, which is to lift sanctions on various kinds of things. And so, they've managed to, even if they don't have a lot of oil out there, they have at least set a precedent that through their military action, they have forced the U.S. to lift sanctions on it. I mean, of course, it could be reimposed, all this, but I think that's kind of the level at which it is significant, as it's showing how desperate and how important Iran's action has been in reframing the conditions for any future settlement and any future negotiations, should they even happen, that they will be more on Iran's terms. So that's kind of important. But getting back to this kind of point about some of the economic effects and consequences, in the chat, people have mentioned that recently on Richard Medhurst's program that there was some discussion about, some kind of program of trying to corner the market in various fossil fuel production, and that they're attacking kind of competitors in this way. I don't know what people think about that. That's something, worth kind of thinking about, whether that is really the case or how that might work out, or whether it's a kind of compensatory narrative now that this has kind of come out of control. But what we can say is that there have been massive losses, big costs to the key oil and natural gas producing region of the Gulf. And so here is at least some totaling of kind of losses up to this point estimated, right? And of course, these keep spiraling upward every day that there aren't, production.
Yeah, these
flowing.
are daily losses. Like,
Yeah.
so
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, tell us, Jay. Yes, these are.
Yeah, so they're saying they're losing, like, the Gulf countries are losing $2.3 billion per day, and that's at the bottom. There's the breakdown, but those are per day numbers, right? So, I mean, we're at 21 days, so you have to multiply all of that out. I mean, and it does make sense. I mean, those are huge numbers, obviously, but it does make sense when you think about it, because 138 ships typically passed through the Strait of Hormuz every day, and the average right now is 5. And, you know, other than maybe a couple of outliers, perhaps like earlier on, all of those have been approved by Iran, right? And, they have even, there's been some reporting on it. They even take, yeah, like a closer route to the coast so that Iran can kind of check things out and monitor it. And, you know, so it's just massive in terms of this. I mean, and I appreciated what Indy said earlier, because I think it's actually a lot of global South countries that feel the kind of first impact of this. And I mean, obviously it does raise costs everywhere. But they will be in many ways the hardest hit economically, right? And I think that is an interesting thing to think about. Not so much about Saudi Arabia, or like who cares, right? But just about countries across the global South that are going to have shortages, right? And fertilizer shortages and things like this too. So yeah, I mean, the fallout of all of this is incredibly substantial. I think the sanctions point is big, and it's not just Iran, right? It's also Russia that they have lifted sanctions on. One of the things that just made me so pissed seeing that yesterday, though, is that the one thing, I think there were 3 countries that they said that the oil couldn't go to: Cuba, DPRK, and I can't remember the third one. But just the fact that, like, they would take this extreme length, right, to say we're unsanctioning oil on our direct adversaries during wars, meaning, of course, also the NATO Ukraine US war against Russia, but this war against Iran. And then they try to make some silly argument, about how it's going to help them to unsanction the oil. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure that Iran and Russia don't really have a very hard time moving their oil. China, I'm sure, is happy to, buy their oil, right? So I think that it makes sense that, Iran wouldn't leap to be like, okay, well, we'll give oil to countries that, you want us to or need us to or whatever. But I do agree in terms of not just the propaganda element, but even just where that shifts negotiations potentially when they happen, and so on and so forth. I just think that the leverage, Iran flexing this leverage over the Strait of Hormuz, and it's not going to be something that is, even if whatever they're able to like create some kind of temporary, I mean, there's no way that they can long term prevent Iran from having this kind of ability, right? Because it's just all their coastline there, and so, and it's such a small it's like what 35 something like that miles. It's a very short distance there.
So
And people keep waiting too for Yemen, and I don't know, I think Yemen is probably just being patient here and understanding that Iran has control of the situation at this time. But that's another potential leverage point that's there that could really make this thing even more catastrophic for the global economy, if the Yemenis close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait on top of the Strait of Hormuz. And so it's
So
it
can
doesn't seem
I,
like it. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I would like to try and explain how the US is unsanctioning, but not in the way they think they are. So this is the situation. Iran, we said at the last episode, we said the price of oil these days cannot really, can be estimated in dollars. In the Gulf, it's around 170 or something in dollars, but it can only be paid in yuans. And the real price is the permission of Iran. So Iran has been giving permission to Japan, has been giving permission, I think, to a Turkish tanker also, paying in yuan, in Chinese money, and there are 140 million barrels that have to pass. And they're negotiating at the moment with up to 8 or 9 countries. Everybody's going to Iran to pay the price of permission, right? What does it cost to get your permission? 140 million, if you price it at around 170, let's say 150, it's $21 billion. That's a pretty big sum for a country like Iran, right? It's probably their yearly military budget or something. But that money can only be settled in yuan through the new Chinese SIPS system, which is an alternative to SWIFT controlled by the US. And that's extremely important because last time the US unsanctioned Iranian oil and South Koreans bought the oil, it was paid in dollars through the SWIFT system into US banking system, and Iran never saw the first penny of this. So this is how the system is being de-dollarized, and Iran is being unsanctioned because the US is saying, well, they have to pay in dollars, and of course we control the dollars, so we do what we want, but they don't. Nobody has to pay in dollars, and once you pay in yuan and it goes to the yuan clearing system, it's game over for the dollar. So something very important is happening because now Iran will get the money from the oil at a much better price than it used to do, and will actually kickstart this Chinese payment system. And the sanctions, and again, I've been talking about this moment of dialectical inversion where security through bases becomes targets and insecurity through bases. Well, the same thing, sanctions against the global majority now become sanctions against the West. We've been mentioning how, the Chinese strategy is do nothing and win. But it's not a passive do nothing. Recently a Chinese foreign ministry spokesperson was asked if they would continue selling dual purpose materials to Iran. Would they continue to sell these things that are essential to producing weapons, tungsten, rare earths, and all the rest of it? And the spokesperson responded by ranting about the illegal aggression by the imperialists against Iran and did not answer the question. In other words, yes, they will continue. On the other side, who's getting the real sanctions now? The global majority, the golden billion, white empire. China banned all tungsten exports to those countries, all rare exports in the beautiful Chinese way. They don't say, no, we don't sell them to you. They say, fill this form and then that other form and then go to this other office. And some people have been waiting for next to 2 years to get these things. They've blown up so much gas and oil facilities that the production of helium is coming down, which is going to be really bad for for setting up their AI dystopia, because apparently you can't make helium in any other ways, and you need that to make the chips to build your data centers. So you are actually in a situation where the West is literally sanctioning itself, and China is at the helm. And I don't know if you guys have seen this beautiful AI animation, Chinese AI animation in the style of old-timey Chinese tales with animals. But it lays out the whole strategy there. And you see at the end, the Chinese are camels doing like a Silk Road kind of caravan. And everybody says, yeah, we're going to stop using the equivalent to the dollar in the tail. And this is going to be a new world where people can just, trade with one another, and just everybody can be friends.
Yeah, that genre is called cat foo. You guys should look it up. It's really good.
Cat foo.
So Adnan was talking about what Richard Medhurst was saying, was that the U.S. approximately benefits from what's going on, which is kind of true. So if you can actually look at this world war in a sense as an attack on Europe. So with what happened with Russia and Ukraine, Europe got cut off from its pipeline gas from Russia, and then it started having to ship gas from the US and from Qatar. And now with the Ramadan war, Europe is cut off from that ship gas and from Qatar, and now they really only have one supplier, which is the US. So if you look at this as a sort of reconquest of Europe, that's actually going according to plan. And I'm not talking about American people who are irrelevant, but American oil companies are making money out of this, and they do benefit. However, if you're sort of used to looking at company balance sheets and cash flow statements, a company can show increased cash flow by selling off assets, or in the Native American term, eating the seed corn, which is what America is doing here. They are able to, what we're witnessing is what I call a fire sale of the military-industrial complex. They're using all of their JASSM weapons. They're using, I think, 6 months worth of production already. Of Tomahawks, I think they're using years of production already. They unloaded the gravity bombs on Gaza already. They've run out of artillery in Ukraine, and now we're witnessing a fire sale of the good stuff, the F-35s, the aircraft carriers. And I want to repeat that Iran has defeated the USS Gerald Ford or the Gerald Fart. You could say it's because of laundry, you could say it's because of whatever their excuse, it's been defeated, and now it's fleeing back to Greece. And they've pierced the invincibility shield of stealth warfare in general. F-35s have a heat signature. F-35s have to still fly through valleys to avoid radar. And they've hit that. So they can also say, oops, like maybe I guess the toilet or the dryer failed in the F-35, but for whatever reason, Iran took that down. So they've also taken down the invincibility.
Also the Lincoln has withdrawn, right?
Yeah.
It was damaged, maybe.
Yeah, I think the Lincoln's like 1,000 kilometers away now.
Yeah.
So these were sort of like the illusions around empire, right? That like a nuclear technology is a game changer, but Iran has showed that no, you can have deterrence without nuclear weapons. They've showed actually a moral path because they took a moral stand against nuclear weapons. There's this idea that missile defense allows you to do anything you want, to attack all of your neighbors and bear no consequences. That illusion is gone. And there's this idea that we have these aircraft carrier and these airplanes that let us kill anybody, anywhere, anytime we want, and impose our will. And that's gone now. And it's kind of a joke when people talk about sanctions. I'm telling you, like in Sri Lanka, people like, so at my gym, which is like uncles who are English speaking, like rich or whatever, they're talking about Iran now. They used to talk, and for the first time, they had the TV on BBC, and I always go and switch it off. But like for the first time, they switched it off because it's irrelevant now. And when you talk about sanctions, nobody cares what Trump is tweeting about sanctions. We know that in order to get oil, there's a new sheriff in town. So and what I say is, for a long time, they set up a genocidal gate at the Strait of Hormuz. If you were evil, you got to let your ships pass. But countries that are actually good, like Iran, they were sanctioned. Now it's been flipped. Now you have to actually be good and decent to pass. And all the hypocrites and the corrupt, they're the ones scrambling.
Yeah, well, this is really useful to hear how this looks elsewhere. I mean, because also at the same time, the shortages and the difficulties, will appear first, obviously, in more dependent, vulnerable economies that actually depend on the Gulf oil, so India and and others. But what I wonder is really something, Marandi, I heard Saeed Mohammed Marandi saying on one of the innumerable programs he's on. I think he has a cot at like.
I think it's, it was revealed today that because he was born in the US, he can actually run in the US presidential election.
Yeah.
And I think in his pre-primary campaign, this is why you see him everywhere.
Yeah, I thought, well, that could be, he could be a good candidate, like he's offering an alternative, like the Republicans, Democrats, they really offer very little in terms of options. He definitely has a different take. And also we should note that there was on X a bounty, placed, a crowdfunding bounty of $1 million placed. And I didn't go seek out this yet. I just haven't had a chance, but I understand that at least at some point today, it had not been taken down, despite this being a violent threat and raising funds on the app to commit an assassination, a murder. So that's, of course, something very significant to consider here, that this is somebody who has been living apart from his family, now has a bounty on his head because he recognizes that he could be a target of violence. I think it's partly because he wandered off, because it's so important what's going on, and mainstream news outlets have had nobody other than a chorus of people talking from within the empire in a perspective that absolutely makes no sense to the reality of what's going on. Like they're arguing about strategy, this kind of thing, was there an exit plan, and this kind of thing, whether, and ignoring like the real elephants in the room and the real consequences of that they invited Morandi on a few of these programs. And of course, the way in which it was a shock perhaps to the system to actually hear somebody from, a different point of view, representing and reflecting Iranian defiance. I mean, that probably is what led to these threats against him. But in any case, what he was saying is that, these economic consequences could be devastating to the global economy, and that every step that they keep taking in escalating is detrimental to not only the West, but of course also the global economy. It's just sort of adding the sanctions, like we've mentioned in the past. It's almost reversing the sanctions and putting the sanctions on the rest of the world. But I wonder how that is looked at. Are these uncles, they're talking about Iran because Iran is controlling and directing events, but how are people viewing and regarding outside of the West's projection bubble? Are they going to blame Iran at all for any of this? There's attempts to try and do that within the West Asian world, these crocodile, well, they're real tears, but for us, we regard them as sort of crocodile tears of these Gulfies, wanting to have their cake and eat it too, wanting to say, oh, we're victims here, while they, allow US bases and operations, attacks, murderous attacks to take place from their territory. But how do we think people, if this continues, we're really only at the beginning of the potential devastating economic effects. All those daily losses to those Gulf countries, none of us could really care that much about that. But that infrastructure, that's just the daily losses of lost income. That doesn't account for the damage that's been done to infrastructure now that the step was taken of attacking the South Pars field and Iran's retaliation. That is years of no production, because it will be very difficult to rebuild those. It will take a lot of time. Unless, of course, they call in China, in which case maybe it would happen pretty quickly. But if they go with, Western oil companies and all that, it's going to be a long time. So this is going to have real devastating effects. How, are people navigating and understanding this? do they really see Iran as in the right, of having to take these steps? Because even Marandi said, we don't want to have to do this to the global economy. This is going to be terrible for people. People are going to die from, inability to feed themselves because the fertilizer shortages, and so on. That's not stopping the West from still pursuing, this death dealing policy. But I'm just wondering what people think about this.
Well, one thing I'd add is we're used, like in Sri Lanka and India and in Asia, we're used to collapse. This is probably the third collapse I've lived through and the second sort of like major one. So we're actually prepared. In the West, people are not used to it. If they get like slight problems, they're going to have societal problems. And the whole Western economy is just like an AI bubble, which is built on cheap, wasteful energy at the bottom of it. And when that goes, a lot of other things are going to go. And these are not sort of like resilient, structured societies. I think we'll actually be okay because we're kind of used to things falling down. Like we know how to pick things up again. And just in the conversations I've been having, not just recently, but over the past few years, so Sri Lanka is kind of naturally pro-American. It's our main trading partner. As you can, like there's entire communities that speak English. People are educated abroad. We have a lot of diaspora connections and so on. But like everybody's fed up with America. So you can manipulate the media a bit and you can tell stories and then that still works here. But then people have seen what has happened. Like we've all watched a genocide for 2 years. And Trump is not really the best storyteller in terms of selling this in terms of liberal values. He just comes out and says what America actually does, and people are not stupid. So besides the uncles at the gym, like just like average people on the street, like your average tuk-tuk driver, whatever, nobody's pro-American. Like everybody sees what America is doing, and I'm telling you, that's a change. People used to naturally look to America, and now people are not. You can fool. What do you say? You can fool some of the people some of the time. You can't fool all the people all the time. And the U.S. isn't even trying. The whole, like Iraq, there was a big media buildup. There's 9/11 to get the sympathy of the world. Then there's like just using idiocy to somehow connect Iraq to Afghanistan to Al Qaeda, which is just you. But like there was a lot of work that went into that, and they're not putting in the work now. So nobody believes this stuff, and people are. I think people are sort of happy that America's getting punched in the mouth, and reorienting to Iran is fine. Like we have a long relationship with Iran. We have thousands of years of relationships with Iran. America is pretty new around here, so I don't think people are going to miss it that much.
Yeah, I think the United States has taken a massive, just soft power hit in the last, specifically post October 7th, right? Like specifically with the genocide and, but all of these things kind of dovetail off of each other, right? Like, because obviously Biden, is the one that starts off and does the first, year and a half, of the genocide or whatever. But Trump comes in and says, hey, like, we're not doing USAID anymore. Like there's no, like we're gonna gut our own soft power like infrastructure. And then you have the media. But as you're saying, Indy, like Trump is so like he's not at all trying to appeal. I mean, it's not even that he's bad at soft power, right? It's that his version of soft power is actually aimed at, Americans that like to watch the World Wrestling Federation. Like it's like like his audience for what he's doing is just people within the United States, right? And a specific set of people. And yeah, I mean, it's very interesting just to, I'm in suburban US, and so like, I obviously see parents picking up my kids from school and stuff like that. But like oh, he's gone crazy. The gas is like, $4.50 now. Like people are losing it. You know what I mean? And I mean, obviously you don't put a lot of eggs, those of us on the left, we know we're very critical of electoral politics and empire and all of this stuff, but they're going to get slogged in the midterms if, they don't figure out an exit strategy of this soon, because people the economy is like, there's a bunch of polling coming out right now, and basically everybody wants the war to end, including Republicans, right? And so, not because they, obviously a lot of these people don't care about Iran, right? But they're just like, why are we doing this to our own, economy, right? And there's not even been any buildup, right, of what those actually like, because I think that U.S. empire could make an argument within an economic framework, sort of like, we got to take some of these strong multipolar actors out in order to shore up this declining empire, right? But they're not doing any of that legwork, like you say, Indy. Like, they're not attempting even to build a narrative that, and so people are just like, what is going on? That's the kind of feeling, here, I think.
You mentioned they could make an argument, and somebody actually said this on Twitter today. It was like my day on Twitter. And I responded, yeah, but on the other hand, when you're a bunch of human flesh-eating, baby-bothering servants of a political economy, that means to turn every single living thing and being into unalive stuff, also known as profit. What kind of an argument can you really make? And this is really showing it. And this whole thing of sanctions, I think, is, I believe what we're seeing is really white supremacy collapsing on itself. Like, there's been this historical accident of 500 years, which was mostly based on a temporary monopoly in some kinds of technologies. Now the knowledge is free, but when they sanction what they think they're doing, I think psychologically in their supremacy, what they imagine they're doing is they're saying, well, we're not going to let you access the good stuff. You won't have all this supreme knowledge and technology that we white peoples have in our genes, in our biology, in our whatever, in our culture, or in our civilization, or in our religion, depending on, the flavor of white supremacy you smoke. But it never works. Like, absolutely every single time they sanction the country, what it has done is that it has pierced this myth that you need the white guys in order to be able to live a proper life, to develop advanced technology, to organize your society, to attain food self-sufficiency, to have a decent health system, to have great education, to just, grow your social nature. And so in a way, that's also how they're sanctioning themselves, because those sanctions invariably have made the countries stronger. They've turned Venezuela in 5 years after a big shock into a nearly food self-sufficient country. That was a country that used to import 90% of its foodstuff, exactly like the Gulf satrapies are doing today. So I think that's a very important point. And what we're also seeing is, the three legs of this empire, the two legs, if you like. One is financial domination. We've seen how this is really crumbling and being transformed into something that won't be a domination. It will be a kind of, collaboration around a common way of doing business. And the other one is extreme violence plus narrative, because violence at the end of the day is a psychological tool. You want to bend people to your will, those that you don't kill. And Hezbollah and Hamas have already proved that, the empire's most feral attack dog, being the Zionist entity, is the most fragile. I mean, it's not even a fighting force, right? I mean, these people can't even, they would run away. Their adult diapers didn't stop them from running as fast as they would want to. They are just not a fighting force. And their high-tech weapons are mostly duds. And you're seeing now, like the rate of duds is incredible. This is why Hamas has enough explosives, to last for another 20 years. And so the myth of all the supremacy of white empire is being obliterated, but we've said on the soft power front, but also materially. And today, probably because it was the end of Ramadan, they started targeting Dimona. So Dimona is where, of course, the Zionist entity does not have an atomic center, does not produce nuclear weapons, and does not stock them. And apparently, they targeted not the non-nuclear non-installations, but the town next door, and a very precise point that could very well be one of those underground bunkers that they have. So they have a big warhead, and they have weapons. They announced today, the RGC announced today, and I'll read what they said. They said, we don't need nuclear weapons, for we have weapons more severe and deadly than the nuclear missile. We have missiles with the capability of electromagnetic explosion, which also nuclear missiles can do, that disable all electronic devices within a 200-kilometer radius and take you back to the Stone Age. We have reached things that America hasn't reached yet. And if you were inclined to not believe them, the very same day, they launched 2 missiles 4,000 kilometers away at the occupied Chagos Island, Diego Garcia installations. And of course, don't expect videos of those arrivals. And the only thing that is left is this genocidal political economy and this kind of obsession with decapitation, obsession with murder, obsession with assassinations. Like, did you know that when they martyred Ali Larijani, they killed 500 folks in that part of town, 500 civilians to get this one guy who, was replaced 5 minutes later. And it's also a really bad idea to get rid of your Kantians. If you want my opinion as an ex-student of philosophy, you probably want to keep the Kantians around because you don't know who's going to replace them. And the Kantians are like very moral. And if we listen to Larijani's wife, I think Marandi was saying how his wife was saying he was such a kind man. He was always helping at home. And whenever he was away, she was in despair because she had to do the housework. But when he was around, as a good Kantian, he was applying this categorical imperative and really pulling his weight. And also the other thing we're seeing is the very clear difference in war between people who fight wars, like existential wars to defend themselves, and bloodthirsty genociders. Like Russia hasn't done to Ukraine what the US and Israel are trying to do to Iran in not even 3 weeks. And this is seen and everybody knows, and they're also losing the cyber war, like the activist group Andala every day is publishing secret information. Today they published information of this colonel who actually developed and implemented the most brutal doctrine of the Zionist regime. And so I think that forces the empire to retreat ever more into the imaginary war, into a world of lies and narratives. And for example, they're claiming there are 450,000 reservists mobilized at the northern border to invade the Lebanon. Last time they tried to mobilize not even 200,000 at this northern border. They were lucky. The commander said, we were lucky when we got 50 to 60% of people showing up. You can be sure that, fewer than that number will show up when in not a week, Hezbollah has smoked how many? 15 tanks. Yesterday, more than ever in their whole history. And they are just not moving. They are not, materially able, like literally their egos has been writing checks that their body can cash, to quote my Top Gun. And the contrast could not be clearer because Iran has not lied so far. It announces its losses, it names its martyrs. You see thousands attending the funerals. You see millions of people in the streets every night. And on the other side, you see nothing. They're hiding their dead. They're burying them secretly. Of course, they don't have any dead because, brown people cannot touch the superhuman Nietzschean Godhead. And that is, the veil is being ripped in every possible way, and people cannot unsee it. And I'll finish my thing now about this thing I saw on Twitter also today. Some guy saying, I went into a pub in Australia, in Perth, Australia. So Perth is like kind of the end of the world in Australia, right? And people were actually cheering for Iran. And the hatred towards the US settler colony and the Zionist settler colony is obvious, absolutely everywhere. And in that pub, folks were actually shouting, hooray for the Houthis. Brothers and sisters, it's not the Houthis, it's Ansar Allah, to you and me.
Yeah, I mean, I think even CNN published a poll that showed that approval ratings or positive views of the United States had absolutely plummeted, in even US allies and around the world by massive amounts, like huge amounts. So it's definitely, as people were saying earlier, I think, Jay, you were saying, that US soft power has taken just such an incredible beating since the genocide. But that has plummeted even further with this, illegal, unprovoked war of choice, for empire and for, greater Israel, in West Asia. That has just, been pretty devastating to, the way the United States is, perceived, and a fundamental realignment is very possible and is taking place. And it's not just following, these kind of, vague perceptions or, kind of soft kind of components of public relations and so on, but like this is also undergirded by, economic reorientation and all the things that we're talking about with China and BRICS. And, it's just that, the United States is not seen as any way or any path towards some kind of assistance or development or anything like this, anymore. People who are making these kinds of decisions understand that if you want investment, if you want infrastructure, if you want a chance to have any kind of sovereign development, it's going to happen with China and others and outside the U.S. system. And all of that is underscored also by the end of the U.S. security regime, because as Benji mentioned, that instead of it being your own security, that maybe you have to pay all this protection money to the mafia, Don, but that the mafia Don is like, very unreliable and, willing to sacrifice you at the drop of a hat. And in fact, it actually makes you a target for the enemies of the mafia Don. So yes, this is a kind of fundamental restructuring, we could say. Somebody posted here in the chat just quickly, I thought, we've been seeing, in addition to, what we noticed with the failure of any real ground force invasion in Lebanon, Israeli invasion in Lebanon, we've also seen, much more evidence of attacks, within Israel, hitting major targets. And I've seen some of these, about Dimona and other nuclear sites being hit. What does this kind of portend? This has been something that has been a bit of a red line. Iran decried, of course, the attack on its nuclear sites by the United States at the end of the 12-day war, because that is extremely dangerous and had never really happened before, except, of course, the US has used nuclear weapons. But, the other threshold was, this kind of bar of not attacking nuclear sites because of the danger of reactors and nuclear materials and radioactivity and so on. Um, but there's like very serious, damage being done. So I'm wondering
Just
if you had any thoughts on this. Yeah.
I just want to add
just
one joke about Kant, just because Benji was talking about it. This is from Philip Proudfoot. It says Iran is strategically holding back its doctors of philosophy. Larijani
Yes.
was a moderate Kantian. DC fears the escalation ladder. Hegelian to Schmittian to Heideggerian to post-structuralist. At the final stage, the subject dissolves, the target disappears, power is everywhere. So there's a joke that Iran has a strategic reserve of like basically PhDs, and America has like a strategic OnlyFans reserve. So
Yeah. When I showed this one to Ali Kadri, he told me, "Oh, Philip Proudfoot was my student actually."
I was sorry but to get to your point, so Iran is what they're trying to do is impose on the fact that like they're trying to impose proportionality on the empire. So they're trying to say, okay, because so this Dimona thing didn't come out of nowhere. They hit, I think, I forget how it's pronounced, Dewar or something. I mean, just recently they hit like an Iranian nuclear site, and then the IAEA.
this morning.
Since the IAEA has like long been a snitch for Israel and given them nuclear scientists to target in the Israeli way at home with their families as they prefer. So what they're trying to say is, you do this, we will do that. The same thing. They're trying to say like, we are equal to you, and this is not getting through. So when Trump says we're going to destroy Iran's nuclear power plants, okay, what he's really doing is saying to UAE and to Israel that like, you're going to get your nuclear power plant, or you're going to get your power plants destroyed. So they're just not understanding proportionality. I think largely because America itself is not getting hit. So you have this weird situation where they can rile up stuff like Ukraine. They don't care. Like someone called it Trashcanistan. They can just go and trash different places and make money from selling the weapons. And that dynamic is unfortunately still there. But in the region, at least, Iran is trying to impose proportionality.
That's right. I mean, that principle of reciprocity has been a finely calibrated tactic, despite a lot of discussion beforehand about how cataclysmic. I mean, Iran has been remarkably restrained, I mean, this is the problem, however, is that that's the same kind of logic that brought the US, to the position of thinking that they could attack because they, strategic patience was misunderstood. And while we're not in that, as we, that was the kind of title for the last of this series, episode 7 was strategic deterrence to strategic victory. And so while that is definitely not the paradigm, it isn't as if Iran has pursued this kind of full out total war, right? They have actually abided by this principle of reciprocity. And the thing is that the escalation keeps going up because it seems that, the other side either doesn't understand and they're not, recognizing this, or looks at its interests in very different ways. Or you could say, and I wonder, what people think about this, is that it seems like the escalation ladder, as it were, is really within the hands of the Israelis, who might have very different strategic objectives in some sense than the United States, really envisions, which is that, if the Gulf gets destroyed, so what? Like, there might have been some investments as a result of the Abraham Accords. And of course, they were a market for Israeli surveillance technology and, security technology and so on. But there are other potential markets, for that. They're not as leveraged and invested in some ways as, Western European and US capital. These big, expensive data centers, and the fact that they're proximate to major fossil fuel energy, so they could be run more efficiently and cheaply in building these data centers in that location on the shore where there's cooling and water, because they're also very water intensive. So it was a location for AI data centers for these AI nations, these artificial countries. But, does that fit into like Israel's strategic calculation? I mean, they seem like their plan, or at least the way they envision their dominance in the region, is to get the hegemon, the US, to, destroy as much as possible these rival states and kind of rule over the wreckage and exploit it in a different sort of way so that they can become the regional dominant force. And, there's even been ridiculous talk about becoming a global sort of, this is like so kind of supremacist, these supremacist fantasies are running so wild, So that seems to be part of the kind of calculus, is that they're willing to continue to keep going further and avoid this. They're not really, they're not thinking about it perhaps in the kind of logic, that Iranian strategic thinkers have very carefully mapped out, and it's been very successful. But when you have this other logic operating, we don't know what the trajectory can be. It's very dangerous that way.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I would encourage folks to listen to the interview that I did with Abdul Jawad on Thursday, right? I mean, he always takes a very sober, not, he tries to present all kinds of, perspectives and sides on it. But in particular, he spoke to kind of what you're talking about, Adnan, of, the US, has whatever strategy it has here. But for Israel, the calculus is a bit different in terms of, and he's really looking at, Israelis seeking to impose a kind of, as he sort of put it, Palestinianization of the entire region, right? Of thinking about everybody, whether it's Lebanon, whether it's, Yemen via Somaliland, whether it's Syria, whether it's Iran, right? That there's sort of a state of perpetual war, and there's kind of a modulation and a comprodorization of everybody kind of underneath their decision of this is when we, turn up the volume on this. This is when we, put in settlements on your land. This is when we, do this. And yeah, it is an extremely supremacist agenda. And I think Iran and Hezbollah really understand this at this point, right? Which is why we're seeing, they always have had, as you talk, strategic patience, and they're, they've always sort of been a type to slowly kind of move up the escalation ladder and really respond to the escalations of, the Zionist entity kind of really below the threshold of what Israel is doing, right? But to say, okay, we're going to impose costs, and we're going to look at a logic of attrition and see if we can kind of wear you out. And, it seems as though from everything I'm kind of reading and following that, Iran has basically decided at this point that that is no longer a viable strategy, right? That perhaps the Israelis didn't take it seriously enough or whatever, but they have to impose real costs. And that the only way to do it is to actually show, look, you bombed Natanz this morning, we'll bomb Dimona this afternoon, and we'll bomb the bunker that your nuclear scientist is hiding in, because that's what you've done to us, right? And then, there was also a building that was bombed earlier, or a few hours ago. There's over 100 casualties from it in Israel. That's significant in terms of just, obviously this, that happens every day within Iran, numerous times over right now, in terms of the way that Israel and the United States have been bombing, right? But that's not something that Israel is used to, even with their, getting used to being in shelters and all of this other stuff, is you just lost a building, which is essentially what they've been doing in Lebanon nonstop, right? And so, yeah, I think that I don't really understand Israeli psychology, or what is the thing that causes them to be maybe, but it's certainly a different approach, right? That they have not really experienced. So
I think the point about strategy is really essential, right? Strategy needs two elements: where you want to get to, and what are you going to do to get to that distant place you want to get to, right? I really think, psychologically speaking, because of supremacy, because of literally having their brains fried on supremacy, it's like putting 2 eggs in a frying pan. The white empire is unable, strategic thinking for Trump is 30 seconds. For the Zionist squatters is the next wall, the next checkpoint they set up, the next kid they're going to kick, the next person they're going to rape. There is nothing else. There is no real strategic thinking at most, in the higher reaches of Zionist strategic thinkers. Their strategic thinking is take over the head of the empire, impose Pax Judaica, and do to the region what the US did to the Wild West. But those are all dreams. They're not actual based on any kind of thing they could materially do, turn the whole of the region into the West Bank. Who's going to do this physically? Oh, we'll do it with AI, with drones, with whatever. These people are literally smoking crack. They are unable to think strategically, and which is why we need to really go at their narratives all the time and practice the great and rising out of shitposting. Speaking of which, I have a couple of shitposts I want to show. That can you do the one with Morandi? Can you see it there? So I want to show you your next president, the US in comrades.
There we go.
And
in a suit.
yeah, I
Well,
vote for this guy.
If you're following
My
Alexander's
president.
example, like the only way to beat Persia is to become Persian.
Maya, it's Maya. Get out of Maya by making America Iran again.
That's actually a very important point that you mentioned, Indy, is that in many of these parts of the world, like the invaders became like, just think of the Mongols, like the period that I study. The Mongols come and they subject, all of these Central Islamic lands in the Middle East, from Central Asia all the way to Syria and parts of Anatolia, to their rule, right? And it was like devastating, and people worried about it. Oh, you have the historians like Ibn al-Athir writing at the time that this was like apocalyptic, that this could happen, and how earth-shattering it was. And then 75, 80 years later, 3-4 generations of Mongol rulers in the Middle East, Ghazan Khan converts to Islam and becomes a sultan basically instead of a Khan, right? And this is sort of what ends up happening over and over through many of the patterns where nomadic steppe peoples came and migrate into the region from the hinterlands, and then they kind of get absorbed within the cultural system that continues. And that's kind of why Iran has this long history and identity, is they weren't always the rulers themselves of these areas, but the rulers kind of adapted themselves. If you want to rule this land, you better kind of do it in a way and in a manner and with the symbols and with the, kind of culture that will be considered legitimate by the people that you are now governing. And so that's kind of a very common, a very important observation, actually.
So is my president, and can you show the second thing? Also today there was a declaration by all these countries that the one on the left, that are going to stand up to Iran and, of course, unblock the Hormuz Strait. No, the other one. Sorry. Can you see the other one? Not that one. There's the third one.
Here. Is this one?
Yes, right.
Yeah.
So these countries signed this declaration, and I decided to make, I'm on the internet, so I make tier lists. And I made a tier list for them. So you have the God tier. This is your tier list of the racial regime, as our friend Alan Lantin would tell you, of white empire as it stands today. And so you have 26 countries is a big word for many of those, but 26 people signing up to that declaration that they were going to stand up. And so that's how it pans out today. So the God tier Epstein lab-grown inhuman centipede is, of course, the US of KKA and its Zionist entity, or I don't know, maybe the Zionist entity and its US of KKA, whatever, however you want to it. Second tier is your neutered chihuahuas. So you have France, UK of the tier ruler. Germany, we kept it family, right? Family safe. Germany, Japan, I've been doing a lot of barking lately. Italy and Canada, my home, the settler colony I call home for the moment. Then you have the Gulf snakes, and the Gulf snakes are, oh, there's only 2 of them left, UAE and Bahrain. So I'm preparing this great track. It's called Dubai by American Dubai. It's going to come out very soon. And the next one is going to be hard Bahrain is going to fall. But it's very interesting that you have only 2 of those Gulf snakes whose governments are credibly rumored to be to have upsticked and go. And not even, Saudi Arabia, not even Kuwait, not even Qatar, not even Oman. Well, all of these people. Then you have the tier of the aggressive gerbils, amongst with the Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, Czech Republic, and the reluctant muskrats, being New Zealand, South Korea, Australia, Romania, Norway, Slovenia. They don't really want to be there, but like Elan colors, so you have to. And finally, you have some bacterial microorganisms that I recommend you never come near by the name of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. So this is your current might of white empire. These are the rulers of the universe, ladies and gentlemen. And once you look at this list, you understand why this thing is not long for the world. And now please put the next one, because I've had an incredible success in predictive history lately where I predicted that famous Professor Jiang, the predictive history guy that unaccountably is on very many supposed anti-imperialist content creator channels, was actually some kind of a nop, and I even called him as part of Team B. So Team B, is this white empire intelligence connected folks who are thinking maybe it's not going to go well, and why don't we blame it all on the Jews? It's worked really well for us in the past, and we can continue being genocidal imperialist in peace once we've cleansed our precious bodily fluids of all that, Jewish stuff. And lo and behold, today the guy was on Tucker Carlson. Hallelujah. I have actually become a god of predictive history myself, so it's all gone to my head. And I'm calling a second one. I'm telling you, Mileikowsky has been returned back to hell. And now we are living in the world of AI Mileikowsky. AI Mileikowsky is the Mileikowsky you've seen since March the 8th, that day when Trump looked so dejected when he left his podium. He might have to become the US president. And I'm not sure, he probably knows he's not fit for the job. And AI Mileikowsky is the guy we're going to see. And you know why we have AI Mileikowsky? Because this Chabad Lubavitch Rebbe told Mileikowsky that he would be the last PM of the entity until the return of Messiah, who would return once the empire.
The actual line was that he would be, he's told him this like in the 80s apparently, or 90s, that he would be the prime minister and from whom the scepter would pass. And that is a reference to a biblical prophecy.
And we joke, but it is true. Thank you, my learned friend. And those Lubavitch Shabbat people are very powerful. They have dug tunnels all over under Manhattan. Actually, there are more Lubavitch tunnels under Manhattan than there are Hamas tunnels under Gaza. They are also powerful in Russia. and they are kind of, the OG of that crazy code made up Judaism flavor, eschatology, millenarist. It's the end of the world, and we're all going to get 7,000 goy slaves or something at the end of it. And about 40% of the Zionist entity population and most of the settlers actually believe this nonsense, right? And if you went to them and told them the specter can't be handed over by Mileikowski because he is actually not living in the physical plane anymore, I think we'd have a mass Jonestown incident, right? Because those are Kool-Aid drinkers from the day they're born. And so they're going to keep on doing the AI Mileikowski for quite a while, and they don't know what they're going. And it's not just me, if you listen carefully, many people, and you can see it's different. Like Trump, you see with lots and lots of people, and Mileikowski used to see also with lots and lots of people. Now everything is contrived. Well, a journalist today published a picture where he said, from my view, and the guy is from Newsmax, which is just something that was created by the Zionists, and someone said, yeah, we can't believe journalists because it's not like they would have lied to us about 40 beheaded babies and mass rapes and, all that sort of stuff. Journalists in the Zionist entity are really devoted to truth. So we've entered a very interesting world in which AI Mileikowski is going to be who's going to run the Zionist entity in a sort of, Ali Kadri sense. It does make sense that a dead guy would be running the empire of death, whose goal is to actually kill every living thing on Earth. I mean, who best to run this thing than an actual dead guy? I mean, you can't beat that, can you? And it sounds crazy, but the other image, can you put it back up? There is this MAGA influencer by the name of Jessica Foster, who has 1 million followers on Instagram, apparently. And this is an AI person. So we are already in that world where they try to they've just retreated so much in the world of narrative that they probably believe that AI influencers can influence things in the world. And, Mileikowski was going to go to Hungary and meet his pal Orban, but he had to cancel. And he had to cancel because he finally scored a date with Jessica Foster, the AI influencer. So he couldn't go and meet real life Orban. So that's my personal conspiracy theory for the day. I've already had one prediction that was true, and it will be two, and then I will be your next Prof. Chiang.
Well, something to aspire to, but I think, Indy, you wrote an interesting piece on AI bubble, so maybe you have something to tell us about. If this certainly is what's going on, the bubble will burst, no doubt. But tell us.
Well, I was thinking about that, like the prophecy you were talking about, and it's like that story of a Greek king. I think it's Croesus, and he goes to the oracle, and the oracle says, I think maybe it was Persia, but he says, if you attack a great kingdom will fall. But it was his kingdom. So yes. Yeah, you could say that Mileikowski would pass the specter, but it doesn't say to who. I mean, one wishes it was to Sinwar, but like, I don't think the specter is. I think the specter is passing from Israel entirely. What Marandi said about Netanyahu being dead or alive was that he didn't care. Right. He said that it was it's another Zionist. I also kind of feel the same way, but I do think whether he's dead or alive, I think we should just act as if he's dead. Just treat him as a ghost already. There's this guy John Boycott, I think, or something Boycott in Ireland, and the people there, because he was such a onerous, even for an Englishman, he was so awful that they just started ignoring him socially. So he couldn't get his paper delivered, he couldn't get his mail, he couldn't get his groceries, and he eventually just kind of like went crazy and left. So whether Netanyahu's dead or alive, I think we should just treat him as if he's dead. And if he shows up again, act like he's a ghost and an annoying one, and just ignore him. But it also goes to just, you can see there's a different attitude towards Iran and towards the empire and how they approach their dead, how they approach their losses. Iran will say, we are taking wounds, we are taking losses, we mourn. And then in the empire, it's like, oh no, it was a dryer, it was a flesh wound. Like, oh, this soldier will hide him away somewhere. Like they hide their dead, and their leaders do not offer themselves. Their leaders are not with the people. It's not about like whether you're with the people in a press conference. It's like whether you're with the people and like taking losses, and they're not. And it's a fundamentally different attitude, and it speaks to a fundamentally different morale as well. And you have to understand that Iran is unified now because they see their leaders in front and sacrificing. And then Israel is a fragile entity. So what Nasrallah talked about long ago was that they wanted to show the world the point that resistance would awaken. I'll read you a Nasrallah quote quickly. He said, we are counting on the day when the will of the people is manifest to all. So they're counting on the day when, there's among the world population, there's a sense that this empire is evil. But for the longest time, resistance has had costs and no particular benefits. You get killed, your family gets killed, you can't make money. If you look at the Persian Gulf, on one side, there's the corrupt who are making money building military bases for their occupiers and selling oil. And on the other side, there's Iran, who should be just as rich and who should be doing, their kids should be driving Lamborghinis, I guess. But they were only suffering. But now that calculation is being changed. Now Iran is the only one able to get out, and the corrupt and the wicked are scrambling. And what Nasrallah said is they're weak as a spider's web. And if you only knew, that is the frailest of creations. And what I say is the spider's web of Israel, it's like a radar web. It extended out to the Gulf, and that's broken. And now the radar web over Israel is broken. And people can see that it's as weak as a spider's web. And what Nasrallah, I wish he'd lived to see it, but the day when the will of the people becomes evident of all, and when people see that the path of resistance is the way out, and not the path of normalization and subjugation and, frankly, humiliation. And I feel like that day is upon us.
It could very well be. I mean, that's kind of what's in the balance, right now. I mean, and in fact, it's very interesting that, Iran gave these Gulf monarchies a few weeks and a few lessons to say, basically, now it's the time of decision. And you can see that the school, the madrasa of subservience, is much weaker than the school of resistance, the madrasa of resistance, of muqawama, because it's in fact actually the mechanisms you thought would establish your security that are making you vulnerable now. And you would be so much better if you aligned yourself with the direction of the region, with a regional kind of sense of security, trade, collective prosperity, collective security with your neighbors, rather than trying to carve out some kind of special, quasi-Zionist-like entities. They're perched on the Gulf under the umbrella, supposedly the security umbrella of the United States, and with the Abraham Accords and alignments with the US. And unfortunately, up to this point, it seems like they have not made a very clear and appropriately calibrated or calculated decision. They're still trying to kind of play it both ways, but often leaning towards continuing and moving closer and closer to, open war with Iran. And I mean, I know that it was indicated that it was fake news that Iran issued evacuation orders for Doha, but can one, really think that might not be far off? That they might actually, depending on how the kind of ladder of escalation, goes, they've been given chance after chance to. But of course, how can they? I mean, they're totally creations of the colonial empires, and they're part of the Epstein class. It's just that they didn't realize that they were not at the highest level. They weren't able to buy themselves, as I've been saying, past the Islamophobia. But that's kind of, I think, really what is at stake here is whether these regimes will fall because they're under so much pressure by the decolonizing war that Iran is fighting, and that might weaken them and convince their populace to, do away with them if they're clinging to this failed system of aligning themselves with the U.S. and Israel, or if Iran will just have, just end up like, exploding them completely. So, yeah, I mean, I think we're at a time of decision. The question is how much longer, this process, goes on.
I wanted to
That's
touch
the
back
big
on something that Jared said, where he's talking about trying to understand the strategic, just brain, in so much as it exists, of the empire, of Israel, of America. And obviously, what they're doing today, daily, doesn't make sense. But if you zoom out, they've gotten away with it every time before. So General Wesley Clark, who's like the thinking man's war criminal, said, like, after 9/11, he got a memo, or he saw a memo. He said, so this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq, then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran. So they got through most of that list. And then when Trump came in, I think there was a sense within the national security state that, like, oh, we're a bit overextended, we can't do it. And Trump was like, no, like, we can do it. We can finish this list. And it's like someone who's gotten away with murder 5 times. Like, they're going to try a 6th time. Like, there's a story that if you give them, no, that doesn't make sense. But like, they've gotten it. So the strategy, if you zoom out, has made sense. And like any Ponzi scheme, it's great until the last bit. But then it's the last one. It's like, the straw that breaks the camel's back. So what they're doing does, and I don't think America's had an original strategic thought since the 1980s. Even putting someone like a washed up 80s star like Trump in is an 80s idea.
It is.
Like,
that
so
was a decade. Yeah.
It's what do you call them, Jay? The what 80s?
The Imperial 80s, yeah.
Oh, the Imperial 80s.
Yeah, so they haven't really had, so they're just following like the old playbook. It's so they can't actually think in any other way, and anyone within that establishment who thought a different way has been weeded out long ago.
Yeah.
So this is kind of just like the path they have to go on.
I just want to make a point. Someone said, well, if Milikovsky is dead, how come Iran hasn't announced it? Well, number one, they couldn't really know for sure. And number two, it's a question, it's horses for courses, right? I'm not the government of Iran. I'm just a foot soldier in the mosaic brigades of the shit posters of the free people of the world. So I know what I'm doing and I know why I'm doing it. It doesn't matter at the end of the day whether he actually truly turns out to have been on some kind of cunning plan to put out AI for a while, maybe as operation for his prostate or whatever. I have no idea what could happen. What I'm saying is we are seeing AI. We are seeing AI Milikovsky at this particular point in time. And as we are seeing AI Milikovsky, and on the other hand, so the empire of narrative and lies, and on the other hand, people who tell the truth because that's how you can maintain a popular war, we can lay into him. We're not like pundits, we don't care. I'm not like here to give you, I'm not really seeing into the future, predictive history doesn't exist. I'm using narrative stuff to fight the narrative battle. And as Indy said, it pays a lot at the moment to go after him as if he's dead. Plus, he actually is dead, but never mind. And but it doesn't really matter. And it's not Iran's government place to say whether he's dead or not. Their place is to kill him, which they already did on March the 8th. So they've done their job. And now let's all together do our jobs and shitpost them. Because these demons went to hell, we need to shitpost so that it doesn't come back from hell. All depends on you, brothers and sisters.
Yeah, I mean, shitpost away. But to go back to what you were saying, Indy, yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. And I mean, I think a big part of it, honestly, is that I think Israel was quite high on its own supply of feeling like it had many successes post October 7th against the overall axis of resistance, and thought, let's just take out the head of the snake, essentially, to use how they would think about it, right? And I think for Trump, there's probably that logic. There's probably people who also understand the rise of China, right? And think, if we could severely if we could somehow either get Iran into the Israeli-US orbit, which seems like a fevered, like to think that, I think requires an incredible supremacist's brain, to just think that you can pummel people into, coming to you. But to go back to Qadri Benji, who you've brought up a few times, like, this is part of the logic of the accumulation of waste, right? Is that if you beat people down enough, they reach a point where they have no other choice. And I mean, even in talking to Abdul Jawad, like, one of the things that he wanted to hedge on a little bit, right, is that resistance actors do have to make choices that sometimes come in the form of, okay, how can we take a break? How can we keep going? How can we, and then sometimes they start to believe, rather than just, I can't remember the two frames he uses, but one is basically sort of the PA, right? Where the PLO becomes the PA, right? And it actually internalizes the logic, right? It actually really becomes Zionist in its own way, right? Because it just internalizes it to such a degree that it just becomes an apparatus of repression, but it tells itself that it is doing the thing that is good for the Palestinian people, essentially, right? And he was sort of saying there's another logic, right? Which is, we need to, give our people some breathing room, right? Gaza right now, right? We need to, hopefully get to a place where we can rebuild. We need to figure out some intermediate, and this might come with some technocratic elements of it. It might come with some level of disarmament, but how do you engage in that dance, right, without internalizing the logics of it so that you preserve the capacity to continue your resistance, right? And I think that that's always something that, we do have to be wary of, is that obviously throughout all of this, these populations are taking the brunt of just, and the empire and the Zionist entity, like, they don't care, right, about human lives. They want to destroy as much as possible. And so they're used to that thing. If we pummel people into submission and we get our way ultimately out of that. But I don't think that I don't see it going that way. I really don't right now. And it seems quite the opposite, that they've really put themselves in a position where they don't really know. They're really trying to figure out, how do we get an exit ramp here? And they can't even figure that out. And so I guess in some ways, it's just a matter of Iran, right? Like, how far can they take this, right? How much will they step into their own, kind of confidence and strategy from their point of view? Their strategy, I think, is what's really important at this point.
I agree. That's a very important point. I mean, and I'm going to definitely go and listen to that. I always am interested in your conversations with Abdul Jawad Omar, interesting thinker. But that kind of problem of the day after thinking and reproducing some of the Zionist logic in a framework that is somewhat defeatist and attempting to be realistic and kind of dwelling upon, and you can understand, the costs of resistance, but dwelling on those costs in a way to generate, some pathway out is exactly what, the discussion, the reason for the document that we discussed with Lara and I, with Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta, one of the authors of a collective of this, document toward a revolutionary charter for comprehensive liberation, because that's exactly what he was noticing among Arab intellectuals that want to normalize or abandon resistance because it's enough already, and we have to think about some way where we could rebuild and have some relief. And so even if it's not, victory, it's the next step that we have to take, and all of this and the logics of that. And that document is framed, very directly around what are the kind of habits of thinking that are actually defeatist and reject resistance and blame resistance for the condition, rather than Zionism and settler colonialism, and kind of fantastically imagine that if we just surrendered, that we could be normal. We could be like the Gulf. And this is what's so important about what Iran is doing, is they've exposed how much of a charade, of a house of cards that is built upon, and also the racist foundations, the necessity of decolonization. And everything that they've been doing has been to demonstrate that resistance is a requirement. It is not the condition that produces these circumstances. The Zionist settler colonial entity, the white empire, or the Epstein empire, is planning on destroying us. And it's not that you can surrender to it and hope to kind of escape. And so this is what this document. So I'm interested in that conversation that you had, and also wondering and encouraging people to go check out this discussion with Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta, and on either Psychic Militancy or this channel. But above all, go read that charter. It's been translated into English. Its initial audience, of course, was for, an Arabic speaking audience, but also for diasporic and solidaristic communities. So go check that out, because I think it raises a lot.
What's the name of that document?
Al Akbar.
It's in Al
It's in Al Akbar. It's the one we're going to discuss on our live stream on Monday.
Oh, great.
Okay, I should have done
I
the
think I
reading.
sent you the link.
The link is in the
It's
chat.
almost, you have until Monday.
I'll post it for listeners again, for the audience, and also for Indy. He can grab the link and prepare.
But I think on that point, I like to make it like on the humorous side of the spectrum, and through the great fine art of shitposting. But what we are saying is there is no room to be a comprador anymore. There is no room to be a PA anymore. There is no room. There is no intellectual room. There is no philosophical room. There is no moral room. There is no strategic room. There is no system of meaning to be part of that death machine anymore. I mean, you're basically standing up to Jonestown is what you're doing if you're part of it. And everybody knows, it's like the only thing I'm still going to quote from Leonard Cohen, since I learned that he finished his life as I think he was a stan of Feigl, one of the worst ideologues of, genocidal Zionism. But everybody knows, and you can't, India's been putting this thing across, and we need to understand what it means. It doesn't pass the auntie test anymore. You can't go to your family Sunday lunch, and when your auntie asks, so what are you doing with your life? Well, you see, I'm actually a servant of a bunch of flesh-eating, baby-bothering, cod satanists. But the pay's good. It's just not going to fly. And this is something that is very deep, because we humans are narrative creatures. We live inside systems of meaning that make everything we think, we imagine, we remember, we do, we desire, we dream logical, rational from inside the system. And we are at a point of inflection where the imperialist system of meaning is cracking, is not somewhere, a place in which you can live anymore. And they think they are going to keep us there through their AI dystopia. But the AI dystopia is based on bullshit. It's based on the idea that with enough computing power, you can actually create intelligence, which is complete nonsense. So the whole thing is collapsing, and most of us feel it in our bones. We know we can't continue living in this way. People know it all over the globe. And this is the moment. And the way we push forward to this moment in the places we occupy is through humor, through shitposting, through showing the madness that is, it used to be called capitalist realism, but it's really genocidal imperialist realism, that this is what is real, this is what is rational because it is real. And we've spoken about philosophy, and I want to quote a great philosopher who said that there's an old saying in Schelling, I know it's in Hegel, probably in Schelling, that all great world historic facts and personages appear, so to speak, twice. He forgot to add the first thing as a tragedy, the second time as a it's funny if it happens again. That was my George Bush imitation.
Yeah, well, I just want to remind everybody maybe as we're moving towards maybe a final round of discussion. And of course, we always like to end with some uplifting videos as a flourish. And I think we've got a few candidates here in the queue. But just like the stream now while you have a chance, share it, get it out there. And also, if you can, just a final reminder really about supporting the Samir project. Let's see if we can boost the Ramadan campaign. We're in Eid, we're celebrating. This is a wonderful chance to be here together. But let's not forget, we can never forget people of Gaza and what they've been enduring. So let's see if we can give them a boost. The link has been in the chat a couple times, and I'll throw it in there again, please, before we complete our discussions for the 8th Iran versus the Epstein Empire, unsanctioning your heart. Make sure to unsanction your heart as well, if you can, and make a contribution. But just wondering, if people have some kind of final thoughts on our discussion today that they want to begin to close with. And Indy, I think you were about ready to come in, so I'm going to pass things over to you.
So I think we've sort of crossed a Rubicon in terms of resistance. For a long time, resistance was the right thing to do morally, and they had the moral high ground. But now it's becoming obviously the right thing to do militarily and the right thing to do materially. So what Iran is opposing is different from imperial losses in Vietnam or Afghanistan. America and the empire has not been able to set foot in Iran. And Iran is actually imposing conditions and sovereignty on a global scale. And for a long time, look, the US empire, or the white empire, could have gone on for a long time. People would have happily traded in dollars. People would have treated them as even elder statesmen. They would have given them much better treatment than they deserve, like the British after the British Empire. But I think it's like someone who's only ever raped. Like, they can't conceive of normal intercourse. They can't conceive of normal trade. So they've never been on a date. They just don't know how to do anything else. So they could have continued for another 50, 80 years. But now it's reaching a point where de-dollarization is not, it's becoming the easier choice. So with Iran, for us in the South, it's becoming, look, we're not brave, I'm ashamed to say. But now it's becoming the easier choice to just trade with Iran in yuan. And we're not doing that out of any particular moral principle. It's a material principle. And that's a big shift. And that's a big strategic victory. You could say that empire has been losing every war, and they have, but those are sort of tactical losses in terms of their global strategy of mess stuff up and make money. That's been working. But now you're seeing a great strategic shift, and it's being imposed by Iran as the leader of the free world, I would say.
The necessity of resistance. Excellent points. Benji, wondering if you have any thoughts.
If I can just speak last, because I want to introduce the final video when I do, and I'll be very short. So if anyone else wants to conclude, I'll just pass.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you all for this conversation and for the work that you continue to do with these streams. Yeah, I mean, I think Indy really hit it. I mean, this is something quite different, and it sets a new example, for the world in terms of resisting empire and imposing costs. And I just also the whole question of U.S. military architecture in the region, the relationships in the region. Time will tell on a lot of this. I saw, Francis, our friend, posted about Syria, and I haven't followed that closely, but I could see that things are really starting to heat up on the Jolani regime there in Syria. And so, I mean, there's a lot. And then Iraq, we didn't really talk about Iraq today, but I also think that, they did a force majeure over like all of their oil the other day. And so there's just a lot that's in play right now. And I think that it's just an amazing kind of time to witness these world events. And yeah, I mean, I think as you all have said, like we just need to keep supporting Iran and the resistance. And yeah, I don't have anything else to add really at that point.
But I'm so glad that you mentioned Iraq and Syria. I saw that in the chat, and we didn't get a chance to come back to it. But also Iraq. I mean, obviously, we already know that there have been high incidents, a high tempo of resistance attacks on the green zone. And that it has led to NATO pulling out personnel from the bases that they've had, a presence that's been there for 20 plus years now. And so you could say that, this is another step in decolonization of the region that has actually been accomplished by Iran. And moreover, we had talked, I think last time Indy was citing some of these excellent, very specific communiques from resistance groups about the tracking and monitoring, where they've given very specific information, the car they came in, the room that they're staying in a particular hotel, and saying, you better leave this place, etc. They have been very important. And of course, nobody thought that like the Iraqi resistance, was some highly organized force, except people in the resistance, right? And they have also given warnings to Jolani's Syria that if you try and intervene either in Iran or in, which means that they would have to cross, territory of Iraq, or to go into Lebanon to attack resistance forces there. And we know that there were some attempts actually that had started to happen in Khiyam, right, which is the place where the Israeli prison during the 18 years of occupation in southern Lebanon. I visited it in 2000 when it was liberated. And it was sort of like almost like a museum of the resistance about the brutal nature and torture that had been taking place in that facility. They came through there because it's very close to the Syrian border, but were repelled. They attempted in Shabaa Farms, again, were repelled. And it seems that just as Benji was saying, that there's no choice to be a comprador, like it's not sustainable, that's actually, if something is happening now, and I've seen reports but can't verify yet, but I've seen tweets and some video of people allegedly rising up against, the Syrian regime, the, ISIS regime of Syria. If this is actually happening, which I think is very reasonable to think that eventually it was going to happen, but it's happened now and in the way that it may be occurring because of the pressure that's been put that you cannot really be a comprador. And this is an activation, you might say, of the resistance energies in the region broadly. And that's what we're witnessing. And so it's very important to keep watching what's happening there and recognize there is an almighty struggle taking place that, as we said from the beginning, that has world historical potential consequences. And I think you had a video that you wanted to perhaps...
Yeah, I want to introduce it, if I may.
Before the Lego. If we're going to end on the Lego, that's become kind of a tradition.
Oh, Jay has one, you mean? Jay has one?
Or the Chinese one is good. Sorry.
Oh, the Chinese one is long. We'll watch it on Monday.
Yeah. Okay.
The Chinese one is like 3 minutes, 4 minutes.
Other ones as well.
This one.
It's good for this one.
Yeah. So this is just. You can scroll up a little bit. The post. So they're asking them to bomb Dimona again. Basically, this is a crowd in Iran, demanding that they continue to bomb Dimona, basically. And this is not in the capital either.
Okay, so we see... Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I was just gonna post that or share that just because, this idea of comprodorization. I mean, part of what is important, I think, to show, right, is that the people of Iran en masse, right, are supporting, but it's not just that the support, right, the Islamic Republic. It's that they're saying continue to attack our enemies, right, and that is the demand. And I mean, I think that even post October 7th, I had friends who lived in Iran, and that was one of the things that they wanted more. They wanted Iran to enter in a more, kind of forceful way. And you can see the population in these, public squares coming together to, demand forceful resistance action. And I think that just kind of speaks to what you all were talking about in terms of, just that resistance is the only thing that is really supported by the people regionally right now. So yeah.
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 That's such an important. Oh, Adnan, go ahead.
Just because you wanted to be last, Benji. So, but we have another
Oh,
video.
you go.
Before we get to yours. So
Oh,
the grand
go ahead.
finale. But I just wanted to show this one that's akin to what Jay. This is in the heart of Iran, and the reason why I wanted to show this one, you can see. And just because it reminds me of our brother, comrade, Dr. David Yagubian, because that's where he stays. And when we spent a week in December in Tehran, we were very close to Van Nack Square, and we went through there all the time. And it's just amazing to see it transformed from, a kind of hustling, bustling, middle class kind of place into a hotbed. There you see of resistance energy. It's just amazing. And who wouldn't want to be there in that kind of festive atmosphere? It's Eid, they're out celebrating. This is Eid, and we wanted to kind of bring some flavor of that. He sent me that video earlier today, and it just brought back a lot of connection and feeling for it. And I wanted to share that, and also to just say hi to Dave, who's, been busy. We hope he'll be able to come back at some point soon. But we're thinking of you, and we're thinking of the people of Iran in these moments. So, Benji, over to you.
Yeah. So start with the image I have there, and someone in the chat is, their brain is still infected by the white supremacy, and one version of white supremacy is, of course, the empire controls everything and is behind everything. And so October the 7th was a Mossad operation, was a Shin Bet op. It was organized by Milikovsky himself when he was still of this world, and all the rest of it. This, brothers and sisters, is a version. It looks like a kind of, streetwise version of white supremacy, but it's a version of white supremacy because basically it's saying, well, only the imperial managers have agency, as the liberals like to use this term, in this world. But the resistance can't have its own plans. It has to be some kind of a scheme because the white man is in control of everything. So we have a hell of a lot of ways to go. And also, as on the left, we've been raised to consider Iran as a reactionary society. We even call it a theocracy or what have you. Of course, today, if it's a choice between a cod demonocracy and a theocracy, maybe. But my brother, Indy, put out this post on Twitter, which I turned into a meme, that Twitter labeled as AI. It's not AI, I made it with Canva or whatever. And he said, for everybody that talk about dismantling capitalism, Iran is doing it. And so I added the prove me wrong thing, because we need to understand what's going on. Like the mass mobilization in Iran is like no country has ever seen, I don't think. And yes, it is bringing capitalism down. How? Well, it's conducting the greatest and maybe the final decolonial anti-imperialist counter-offensive since Operation Bagration that went from Kursk all the way in eastern Ukraine all the way to Berlin, right? And this is something like this that we are seeing. I've been a revolutionary since anti-imperialist since I was 10 years old, so like 52 years old. I've never said what I'm saying today. I've never seen what I'm seeing today. We are seeing something that is a 500-year episode. It is really the plates are moving, things are changing. If you bring this empire down, you are objectively being anti-capitalist. I hope my Marxist brothers and sisters can get their intellect around this particular fact. And if you see the mobilization in Iran, you can tell these people is not gonna settle for a ceasefire. I mean, they are paid so much already, they are so mobilized. No Iranian government can turn around and say, okay, we just go home and let them do it again in 6 months or in 1 year or in 2 years. Are you crazy? The people will not allow this to happen. The people will force the Iranian government to take the anti-imperialist road all the way to Al-Quds. I'm sure of it. I can feel it in my bones. And I saw this quote that was absolutely brilliant about Iran, but it says something about what anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist revolution is in this day and age. And it's in the world, when war breaks out, the officials worry about the resilience of the people, but in Iran, it's the opposite. During wartime, the people worry about the resilience of the officials. So this is an account on Twitter called Hamid Rasai who posted this. And I think he really gets it. What is the essence of this world historical moment we are seeing? Remember, Iran already produced the greatest ever mass popular revolution in the history of the world in 1979. And there are more people mobilized around the anti-imperialist colonial liberation project for the whole region today than there were in 1979. I want to announce, by the way, that we're going to move to a weekly schedule simply because we've decided that sleeping would be a good idea, as it's very clear this is going to be a war of attrition against empire. So we are going to slow down on the rhythm, meet once a week, probably on the Monday nights. We'll make sure we invite distinguished guests every week and try to get some women also to share their perspectives. And I will introduce the final video for today. As I said, everything is turning into its opposite. It's this beautiful, like for a Marxist thinker, it's this beautiful moment where you see dialectics at work in the inversion of dynamics at work. It's like a sight to behold. And, AI was sent in this world. I think God created AI not for the dystopia they think is going to be, or for controlling our minds or our thoughts or whatever. God created AI to grow tomatoes automatically in China, but also God created AI videos for one thing, which is the most perfect anti-imperialist agitprop days. And today it will be me quoting the Holy Quran in the honor of the Eid festival and Eid Mubarak, brothers and sisters. And here's the quote. And the disbelievers planned, but Allah planned. And Allah is the best of planners. And so it is with AI. And this is what Allah planned for AI. Take it away, brother. So, Eid Mubarak. Swift victory to the free people of the world. Death to America being the moderate demand at this point.
Peace to you all with justice and solidarity. We'll see you next time, maybe Monday, not this coming Monday, but a week from Monday. I'll be traveling, so I have to slow down with some of these at some point. But if you're in Philadelphia, come out on Wednesday, the 25th at 6 p.m. to the Philadelphia Liberation Center for what looks to be a pretty interesting panel. Gosh, what is the title? I think it was something like War on Iran, Burning Questions for the Resistance. And there'll be Gabriel Rockhill will be chairing it and offering some comments, and Nazia Kazi, Adim Suhail, and myself. And I believe, Jay, you're planning on attending, so people can come and meet you as well. And so it should be a good discussion. So do come out for some live in-person sense of community. And we look forward to coming back with more content and also, of course, episode 9, in a little bit over a week of Iran versus the Epstein Empire. Thanks, everyone, for being here. It's wonderful to be with you. There was like a little convulsion in the chats and all that. I didn't get a chance to moderate as closely. I'll have to appoint more moderators, so we always have somebody in the crowd. If you're interested in volunteering to be one, do let me know. But the best thing about these live streams is the interaction and engagement with you and your comments. It's been a really vibrant and lively discussion, both on screen and in the chat. So thank you all for being here. We'll see you soon, inshallah.
Thank you.
Free Palestine.
Free Palestine.
Free Palestine.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.